Everything we have produced thus far has been animation. For animation's sake, we've just been exporting out more or less videos. We're going to switch gears now for this last series, and we're actually going to start producing interactive content. Inside of Animate, you can actually export out a variety of formats, depending on what you want it, what you're producing, right? So obviously one would be video, but taking that aside, the interactive formats that you could do are either web, which will be HTML5, Canvas, and WebGL. We're going to talk about this more in a second. There's the Swift. This is basically Flash. So back in the day, we used to, when I was just a young person, basically when you go on the internet, if you wanted anything inside the browser to be interactive or animated or even videos, they were all produced using Flash. The problem with Flash is that it was technically a plugin that was attached to the browser. So what would happen is it was very closed and it was unstable for one, meaning it would crash a lot. But more than that, you can hide because it was like a not self executable, but it was a separate kind of proprietary file format that you couldn't see. People could hide Trojans and viruses and just general malware inside of them. So eventually it has been removed. Steve Jobs of Apple said they were no longer supporting it, and then the rest of the industry followed. When we've been working and when we've been doing animation, we've been doing ActionScript because that has more robust animation tool sets. However, if you were to actually output those as interactive components, you're going to find that you're not going to be able to share it with anybody. You'll be able to work on it locally because your computer knew it made it, but if you try to send it to someone, it's not going to work. Okay, so we don't really do that anymore. This is it's still there, but it's not really as useful as it once was. The other thing that you can also do is you can actually publish for a mobile platform, either Android or iOS, and that's with these Air for desktop and Air for Android and Air for iOS. So I used to teach this, but this is also another thing that Animate themselves have been starting to remove. The only way to actually do it now is you actually have to go onto Samsung, believe it or not. You have to go to Samsung's site, and they have like a plugin that goes into Adobe Animate. But I don't really want to go through the whole process because that just tells me that they are removing it. I don't even know if it's still there. They started a couple of years ago, so I stopped teaching that. Okay, so what we're going to be doing though is exporting into a web format, and the main reason for that is that the web is ubiquitous. It can be played on mobile devices, on computers. It's universal, right? It doesn't matter if it's PC, Mac, Linux, whatever. They are all able to do that. So that's the Animate used to be called Flash, and the way that it kind of repositioned itself is it now allows us to export out in the web standards as opposed to just Flash or Swift files, right? Using ActionScript. Okay. That being said, we are going to be we're going to be producing some like more or less web pages using Adobe Animate. Okay. Now, if you've already taken Web 1 and or Web 2, then this will be familiar to you. You can kind of just ignore what I'm going to say. But the idea here is that pretty much every web page that you look at, the one you're looking at right now, all of those contain these three documents. Okay. They might contain more than one of each of these. More than likely they do. However, they will contain at least one of each of these, depending on the complexity and what have you. Okay. So HTML is the actual document that you're opening up that the browser reads. And it contains all of the content, meaning all the written stuff, all of that is done in there. The images will be embedded into it. They'll be linked to it. Videos would be linked to it, things like that. But that contains the actual content. The CSS, the Cascade Style Sheets, that is what formats the page. So that would be linked to the HTML, and it just says, when you see this text, make it a certain size, make it a certain typeface, make it a certain color. It does all sort of the design elements of it, okay? You're not going to really need to know specifically what all these do. I just want you to be aware that it's a collection of documents. And then the last one is JavaScript. JavaScript is a scripting language capable of doing like full programming things where you'll have if then else statements and for loops and all of that. If you've ever done any programming, you'll know what that means. But more or less, it allows you to move things, to make things interactive, to make them dynamic. That's what JavaScript does. Where these are basically flat kind of content, this does the heavy lifting of those other elements. There is some animation actually in CSS too, but even to do that, it's kind of funky. You're going to rely on JavaScript. Okay. So the reason why I even bring this up is because when you go to export this out in the future here, when we do our next bits here, what you're going to see is that you're not going to export out just like a single file. It's actually going to be a collection of files. It's going to export out those files, and then they all need to be, they must stay together inside of a folder. So you're going to make a folder and you export out to that single folder. And then if you want to view your work, you would open up the HTML doc, but these must be in the same folder file structure that they were exported in. Otherwise, when you go to open this up, it'll just be like an empty page because it won't have any of the content. It won't have these things linked to them. Okay, so just be aware that when you export out your work as HTML5 standard, basically what you see is a web page here, it's going to be a collection of files, not just one single file. All right, that's the thesis statement.